Hey guys, welcome back to Seller Sessions. Again, we bring back Chris McCabe. Hey Chris, how you doing?
Hey Danny, good to be here.
Cool. Right, today what we're going to talk about, you've covered this in part in an article.
hmm
There's this whole thing about multiple accounts, multiple logins, IP addresses, the skies are falling, you can't go on holiday. So I know we can't produce all the answers, but this session is about starting the conversation of how these things could be managed
Right.
and like dispelling some of the myths that we actually know about
hmm
and understanding now that people are working with multiple accounts in different domains, whether they're consultants, companies. People can go on holiday or they have to be sick at some point in their life. So there has to be
Yeah.
workarounds, but I'm not saying that you're going to agree with all of these. So what I'm
hmm
trying to do in this session is just put different elements together. Let's work on the criteria that you're very clear on, right? Which
Yep.
is a second account. And let's give scenarios of why you would have a second account. Well, you may want a second account because you want to start an independent brand
Yeah.
under an independent business because one day you may decide to sell that business.
hmm
Or you may want to keep it separate that you work in a partnership and it might be easier further down the road if you feel like you might go your separate ways. One could have one brand and one could have the other, which will
Right.
simplify things.
Right.
Some things just as a cost center. You may want to limit the impact on your business, not just in suspensions.
Right.
You may want to have two separate brands and keep them separate as two different entities, as an
hmm
example. So let's talk about the possibilities of having a second account, why you would have a second account, and how you would access to getting that second account to have your own separate business here for Amazon.
Right. I mean, and to start with, there's a misconception that Amazon hates giving permission for second accounts or that they're against it without any real reason behind it. I mean, that's a misconception because they're not against it. It can be approved. You can write the seller performance the right way versus the wrong way and get approved for a second account. They just don't want to rubber stamp it and allow anyone a second account for any reason that's not a valid reason, because you're creating more work for them. You're creating, literally more accounts for their teams to be able to review. And these teams are already kind of stretched to the limit in terms of capacity and headcount. So they're not just going to say, sure, create a lot of more accounts, as many as you want, and create more work for us. We don't care. We can just scale this exponentially and no worries on our side. So you are making more work for them, but they will approve you're creating more work for them as long as there's a legitimate business reason behind it. And we can talk about what legitimate business reasons are. I addressed some of that on the web retailer article you're talking about. But
Yeah. So let's address those things.
yeah.
Who's going to qualify for a secondary account and how do you reach out?
Yeah, and there are multiple reasons. I mean, obviously, if you have a marketplace growth manager or you've got a strategic account manager from the past, if you've got a relationship with category management, which is where I spend a lot of my time with my active clients, there are other avenues other than just writing a simple email to seller performance. But
Okay,
let's just assume you don't have those things. Yeah.
okay, so you've just focused on all the rich kids. What about the poor
That's
people?
fine. No, I understand. The rest of the sellers who don't have those other means of bringing the subject up are
Yeah,
writing emails to seller performance explaining what that legitimate business reason is.
yeah,
And it can't just be, some people actually write, well, if we lose the first account, we want to have a hedge.
yeah,
And a contingency plan is to have a second account. Guess what? That's not a legitimate business reason.
yeah,
This is why they have the policy. They know people are out there trying to create a hedge. They already understand that a lot of people have created accounts without permission that they may not have detected yet with their tools.
hmm
They're trying to reduce that by saying, listen, if we find you down the road creating your own accounts and you just say, well, I knew it was policy compliant because it was a different tax ID and a different business entity or whatever reasons you give them, they'll come back and say, well, you never asked us for permission. So this account is not one that you get to keep. They might not necessarily close all of your accounts for doing that,
yeah,
but they'll at least send you the warning, hey, you never got permission from us. Why do you have this other account that we now see, for whatever reason, we now see you're related to?
yeah.
So they have to reduce evasion of that policy. I mean, it's rampant. We all know that tons of people have multiple accounts that they don't want to talk about, but they might have just not surfaced on Amazon's radar the day you created them. It doesn't mean that it will always stay that way.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, so let's look for legitimate reasons that you'd have an account. Let's just say you've got a brand that you sell in home and kitchen.
Great.
And you've got an array of products there. That's account number one. But then you decide you want to go into sports and outdoors, create a completely different brand, different cost center. So different limited company, if you're, say, in the UK. How would that work? Like, say, for instance, what would it work like in terms of you own both of those business? Can you be a director on both of those accounts as long as there's a secondary director? Or can you be a sole director of an account? Yeah. And have two limited companies? Does that work? Or
it's not necessarily about having a second person or a secondary director at that point. It's about explaining to them why you have two different brands that need to be separated. It's not enough to say we have two different brands and we want to keep them separated, because plenty of people do that within a single account and they don't have any friction or problems. Okay. You want to talk about, like, for due diligence reasons, for accounting reasons, for legal reasons, you need to keep them separate, but explain what those legal reasons are and explain what some of the accounting reasons are as well. Because a lot of people just write these emails to Seller Performance. Well, we need to do it, for organizational purposes, for keeping the book separate, things like that. But they don't say how or why. I mean, you need to give more detail than that.
So would it be legitimate to say that you plan one day you may need to sell the business, and the second one is when you start in this business, that could be the one to be sold? Can you be that transparent?
I'd be careful with that, because they want to make sure that they understand you, and you're not saying you're going to sell your Amazon account to somebody else, which is not compliant. Policy is you can't sell an account. You can sell. I understand that Amazon businesses get sold with an account attached to it. But it's just important to understand how they're going to read some of this language when you email them, saying, first of all, yes, I would recommend. I mean, a lot of people get permission granted with legitimate business reasons. There is maybe a very small percentage of people who have what I consider to be acceptable, legitimate business reasons who come back and tell me, well, Seller Performance told us no. The big problem is that no one asks Seller Performance. People are making these own decisions for themselves. Like I said, saying, well, I set up a separate company with a separate tax ID, and they think that's enough. The problem is you're making the decision about what's enough or not. Seller Performance is supposed to make that decision. If they feel like you've done this on your own and you went rogue and you're off the reservation, then you're doing things in a way that they don't want Amazon sellers to do it. Okay, and they want to have final say, right?
Okay, so to avoid us going around in circles here and me coming directly and go to the point, what is a legitimate reason, in your opinion, to open a secondary account?
So explain why those two, in your example, explain why those two brands need to be handled with two separate accounts. Don't answer that question with I don't know or I haven't thought about it. Have actual reasons. Give them like a bulleted list of this is why we've got two different brands, or we're launching a new brand. Some people, here's an example, some people are reselling and doing private label, and they want to keep the reselling separate from their private label brand. And the only way to keep the inventory separate, to manage the inventory, to manage the accounting and other, business critical issues, is to keep them in two separate Amazon accounts. It's not just about ownership at that point. They're less worried about, obviously they're worried that you're trying to game the system, that you're trying to either create a backup plan, or you're simply trying to outcompete your competitors by having a second account. So they're very worried that you're going to mix inventory, that you're going to be selling the same or even similar items on two different accounts. Sometimes they grant permission and they say, the language itself says, make sure the inventory stays separate. You don't have the same items selling on two accounts, because then you're outdistancing your competition in ways that are unfair. So keep that in mind when you're writing this stuff up to send in, because if it looks like to them, maybe not in your own head, but if it looks to them like you're just making excuses, but you're really just trying to get an extra, a leg up on the competition, then they're going to say no. So it has to sound very organic, very legitimate. We've got two sets of books. We have to keep two different books because of XYZ, or we have to keep this brand inventory separate from that brand's inventory for this or that reason. Sometimes the brand that you're selling, if you're a reseller, says, we're only going to let you sell the stuff on Amazon if you have create a separate account that they approve, and you're only selling our brand on that account. Now, obviously, you can't sell 7 different brands on seven different accounts. They're not going to go for that.
Yeah.
But they might accept that if it's one additional account just to sell that brand and you approach it the right way.
Cool.
So does that help?
Yep. Cool.
Yeah.
So then the next step is going to be, once you've spoken to them and it's got accepted, is then what are the guidelines here now? So are we talking different email address? We're talking about a different company name, different tax ID, separate VAT, for instance, in the UK, right? But what about the official business address? Can that be the same as your other one? Because let's just say you got your business.
You're approved. You mean if Seller Performance approves you for two different accounts? Yeah. You don't have to sweat those details as much once you're approved, because they know it's the same company operating the two accounts. You're not, you don't have to spend all this energy trying to like make sure that they're not linking the two accounts up. They've already linked the accounts up.
Yeah.
So, you certainly want operations to appear separated. You don't want to use the same everything. You want to keep things as separate as possible. It's just smart to do it that way.
Yeah.
But they're more worried about you keeping the inventory separate than they're worried about the physical address.
Right. Okay. That's key. What else was I going to say with regards to this subject?
I mean, that being said, most people do have a separate address under their account.
And generally, how long does the process normally take to get this cleared?
However long it takes Seller Performance to respond to emails that day. So it could be same day, it could be the next day.
All right. So it's not like 3 or 4 weeks. It can be within a matter of a couple of days.
I haven't seen a lot of emails going back and forth where you have to send 10 different things. I mean, I only see that when people submit something really quickly and incomplete, and they start asking questions like, well, how are these businesses going to be separate? And people write back and say, well, I just told you we have a separate tax ID, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Typically it's cleaner than that. It's cleaner than the usual like appeals process, and they get back to you and they kind of give you a yes or a no. Like I said, the big problem is people are afraid of getting a no. And so they start creating all these, workarounds that aren't a good idea.
Yeah.
So, and they start overthinking it, I guess, in certain ways where they're like at different laptops, different IPs. I mean, you're signing in from the same location sometimes because you've already got the approved accounts. So they're not looking for these people like, well, too many IP hits and we granted them a second account. What's going on here? They don't have time for that, and they don't care about that.
Yeah, and I was going to say that because that's some of the stuff where the skies are falling online quite often. I mean, people take it to a level where they run a remote desktop. I mean, you can spend $25 or so a month on a remote desktop, pay an engineer to set it up with new email addresses. But I mean, since they've introduced the passport, I don't know in the US, but in the EU, you now need to give out passport details. But prior to that, people were setting up, say, a remote desktop was another workaround because of their paranoia. They're probably not always aware that, and this isn't just about the secondary ownership of a secondary account under a different business name. This is like people are paranoid of, they may work on other accounts. They may work as a consultant to help people. And so the last thing they want to sit there and blow up their own account and someone else's. So what they do is they operate on a remote desktop on the ones that they would regularly.
I suppose part of the paranoia is that you will retroactively lose the permission, but I haven't seen that a lot either.
Yeah.
I suppose people are afraid that if they get approved and then they slip up and they start selling the same inventory on two accounts or some other related slip up, that they'll suddenly get an email. And of course, it's hard to predict what Amazon's going to change in terms of policy and what they're going to send in terms of messaging month to month. They're afraid they'll get a message saying, well, we know in the past we granted you two accounts. Now we need you to consolidate them and to limit it to one.
Yeah.
The emails telling people to consolidate two accounts into one typically go to people who went rogue and did this on their own. And they're just discovered to be operating two different accounts.
Yeah.
Because their default setting is to send the warning first, not to cancel all the listings on an account and close it for you and tell you we're doing this to you because you refused to consolidate these two accounts. You get at least a warning first. You get some time to move things around and get established, with one account instead of two. But that goes to the people who created 2 or 3 accounts. Like I said, at the time, they weren't detected. So they thought, well, I'll just make another one then. And I'll register this one the same way I did the second one because nobody caught that. But later somebody slips up, something connects the accounts, And an investigator, the investigator checklist, they look at related accounts as part of the investigations they do for other reasons.
Yeah.
And if they look in the tools and they see, you said there was a screenshot of the tools on some Facebook group the other day.
Well, I've got that pulled up.
You want to talk about that?
We'll talk about that in a little while. I just want to carry on this point here, if you don't mind, and then I want to elongate back into that subject, because I think it will start to make sense. So the next thing
I'm going to... you have a bunch of accounts that were never detected, that you never explained, or you've just created them, and they look at the sales activity, just to finish that point, and they see that there's a bunch going on multiple accounts, and there's no annotation on any of these accounts that Seller Performance let you have them. They're going to wonder what the hell you're doing.
Yeah. Because to going back to the whole IP thing, like there are people out there who are going to, because once you've got that set up on a remote desktop, you're under that one IP. It doesn't change. So it doesn't matter who logs into it. It's still that same IP. So they can be anywhere in the world. And I think what's happened is people will have VA turnover, or they have to rotate it, and they don't want to have to keep setting up these accounts after account after account for these different VAs that are leaving or working part-time or your account. At some point, you have to go on holiday or be sick. And sometimes your parents may be ill or family members may be ill, and you may have an emergency.
Yeah.
You still need to supply to your customers. And if you're not provided the right information, this is why people would lead to setting up on remote desktops as well. Not everyone's trying to game the system. What they're doing is because it's Amazon is, shoot you in the face now, ask questions later.
Right. Guilty until innocent. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you could end up, imagine you got the stress, like your wife goes into hospital or something. So you've got the situation.
Aren't you just talking about adding users though? How is that how is that an additional account? I guess I'm not following you can always go.
What I'm saying is that someone could set you up an email address. You could have a remote desktop, which is under one IP. Wherever you are, you log into that remote desktop under that same IP.
Yeah.
So you could have a VA going, okay, can you jump on that remote desktop, please? Because such and such is off ill. And can you respond to that customer, because you're going to get penalized for the 24-hour window? Or you can leave it, and then it's going to kill your metrics. Can you see the argument here? Like, if you're not given the information and you want to protect your Amazon business, you could get spanked here because your metrics gets damaged because you or a family member suddenly becomes ill. You didn't follow up with an Amazon customer, and this all lies where the problem is, because you're terrified of speaking to Amazon. And sometimes it's easier for some people to go, do you know what? I just set up a remote desktop. Job done. Now, the next bit I was going to get into so the next step is you're not necessarily going to need to have a remote desktop. Let's look at consultants. Now, consultants are generally going to have their own Amazon account, and then they're going to work on other Amazon accounts, and they would have a drop-down menu, like you select countries from your drop-down menu. Like if you're in the UK, you've got a menu to drop down to the 4 other 5 countries. Yeah, Germany, France, Italy, and Spain. And it's the same kind of thing. You've got a drop down, like a merchant kind of drop down, where you can select and jump through the different accounts. It's a bit like when the accounts are linked together. Generally, that's based off the singular email address, which is associated with your account, which I'm going to go into in a little while, because that Screengrab that I was talking about will start to make a bit more sense as we try and patch the elements together. So there's one point. Then you've got the big account management companies that look after large brands. They have staff that not only work in the office and work remotely. So one of my understandings from this, speaking to someone, is that the owner of the business, you will use their passport, for instance, in the EU. It might be the same in the US now. And they would set up all the VA accounts under them, because that becomes all the accounts relate and link to them. Yeah. And then they can give them out to their team members to access the accounts. Now, as long as the team member has an authentication app, like the Google authentication app, you can use that and you can log in without any issues, because the association with the account is with the person. Because I think, from my understanding now, and looking at this Screengrab, which we'll discuss in a moment, is that I think Amazon are keen to see, all right, this person's linked to accounts, but what are they like, in terms of operation? Do they have a load of suspended accounts? Have they done lots of naughty things? Or are they a good, wholesome seller? Therefore, that whole IP idea starts to subside. I don't have proof of this. I'm just running these concepts by you. Because if you're a company turning over multi-millions of pounds, managing loads of Amazon accounts. There has to be a way that people can be sick, go on holiday, or staff change from time to time.
People run into problems usually if it's like a seller who's also a consultant. That's when they start seeing I'm not a seller. I've never been a seller. Yeah. So I have no selling history. I have no items for sale. Like, my consulting company is very different from somebody who's a seller and a consultant. And that's where I've seen a lot of horror stories is somebody says, well, I was managing accounts for other sellers and I have my own seller account. And we might have overlapped on not just sign-ins. There might have been some address information that was similar. There might have been some item type, some inventory that overlapped that was similar. That's when you start looking like you're not you anymore. You're someone else and you, or you're simply someone else. Yeah. If they think you're sharing operations, that's when you start getting the warnings and problems where they're warning you for things that aren't actually happening in real life. They're looking at the tools to figure out what you might be up to, but they're never going to necessarily just take you at your word. If it looks like you're up to something and you're just denying it, I mean, 99% of the time people deny it when they're operating multiple accounts anyway. Yeah. So if you look like somebody who is doing that, even if you're not doing it, then you're essentially guilty at that point because it looks like it. And they're not going to spend all day trying what exactly you're doing in this or that warehouse from this or that address. People have innocent relations that show up like in your screenshot. Sometimes there's a phone relation, and then there's the whole issue of friends and family, those accounts overlapping. Like, hey, my brother has an account too. My sister has one. My mother has one. The problem with those situations was it looked like the same person was just having somebody else create an account that they could run, counting on the excuse that, well, that's not me, that's someone else. Look at the name of the credit card. Look at the name of the bank information. That's not me. They were hanging their hat on that, and Amazon didn't buy it.
Yeah, totally. So let's move into the Screengrab. I'm quite excited about this. This is turned up on the Tinternet over the last few days.
And I never found the post. So has it been removed? Maybe we should start with the post itself.
Yeah, so there is a seller. I won't expose him. He shared this post. And basically what he was saying, which is fair enough, he shared this to show you the internal workings of Amazon from this Screengrab, and was basically saying, look, your time's up. If you're doing lots of black hat stuff, then Amazon will catch up with you. So what he was trying to do is promote things in a good way, not try and use it for any other reasons. But obviously we get excited with these screen grabs because we're nosy sods. Right. And we want to know what's going on and try and understand and pick these things apart. So this screen grab, so it's in like a table, worst status, and it's got a column called SIVA, type, NSB, velocity, ACHCCE, there's U, there's FU, I wonder what that means, and then there's SPH, 8PH, and IP. So let me break this down. So column 1, you got the email. In this case, it says worst status, and it's saying normal. Yeah. The CV, which is 1, and then the type is M. And then they've got a velocity column that says 250, and it says 433% used. And then in the ACH column, it's 0, and then credit card is 2, E is O, U is 1. So a lot of this stuff doesn't seem to make sense. But then when it gets to the IP column, in this one here, it says 31. So I don't know whether that's 31 different IP hits or what. But then if
sign-ins. I mean, I don't want to get into too much of what that means because it sounds like it's an illicit screen grab from somebody inside the company. Yeah. So I don't want to get myself into trouble by defining what some of the abbreviations mean.
Yeah, but where it gets interesting, you don't have to comment here. There is where it's got the worst status. There's a couple of ones that marked in red. It says blocked. Seva is a question mark. Type N. Or actually, no, type is H, and it says velocity 2,500, 0% used. Right. And then it's got 8P, which has got like a mobile phone icon, and then it's got an IP, which has got like a computer icon, and that goes further down the list. So it's quite interesting. So my point is here is that it looks like they are tallying up accounts, and something's appearing on these accounts under this email address, for instance, where the interesting one, which says IP is 31, but it says normal. It looks like this account is operating in a normal fashion,
Yeah.
But it's showing the percentage on velocity at 433%. So maybe that's some level of trigger along with the IP, which has brought it into this list.
Yeah, of course.
Where
I mean,
it's
the tools,
yeah.
If you queue up for an investigation, it means you've hit, these different data points, and the accounts look related, and they need a person, an investigator, to review some of this to figure out whether or not you need to be passed or investigated further. If they investigate further and they see no annotation saying, hey, there's 2 accounts here and they're not approved, if they're not approved, they're going to send you the warning.
Yeah.
If they can't figure it out, they might send you something to tell you to explain how the 2 accounts are related. If they can figure it out and they're aware of these 2 accounts and they've been aware of it for a while and they don't see any problem with it, they'll annotate that they're passing it and that there's no problem there.
Yeah.
So
cool.
The investigation, after you queue up, obviously the data points lead to the queuing up, and that's algorithmic and that's automated. It's the person who evaluates that information and analyzes it and decides what action needs to be taken. Sometimes there's simply no action, right?
Yeah. Okay, so basically let's wrap this here. So just to wrap on this, the whole point of this conversation is not because we have all the answers, but is to start the conversation to get to a better place. Because it seems straightforward if you want to own a secondary account, secondary business. It's still a little vague on why you would do it and how you would guarantee that Amazon will find it acceptable. It's going to be on a case-by-case basis, which
it'll always be evaluated case by case.
Yeah. So it's best to get that done again now. Now, then let's look at the remote desktop things that some people are doing, which their reasons are genuine, is because they really are lacking the true information. So just by the conversations that we've had, we know that there's companies out there that have got multiple logins that hand out to their team. They've told me. I'm not going to reveal what they are. To me, it's above board. It's because they've gone and got the clearance. I know independent consultants, the same thing. They're logging in under the same IP. What I'm trying to do is dispel the myth. But what I would say to people is that go and get your own counsel on this. Contact Amazon, get everything in writing, because I don't want to suggest anything here and then you get suspended. I'm only doing this.
That's your disclaimer.
I'm just trying to get to this stage of let's get a bit of clarity here.
Exactly.
It's often chewed over, this information, and I'm not saying the information I've provided is correct. It's just from the bits I've been digging in.
Oh, yeah. This is a hot topic. I mean, that article that you referenced that I did for Web Retailer I know for a fact, has gotten tons and tons of readership for a reason. One very important thing I forgot to mention. Just because you call seller support and you explain something to them over the phone and they say, yeah, sure, that's policy compliant, having that in a case does not mean that your accounts are annotated and you have permission for it. And I should have started this conversation with seller support, business development people, account seller services managers. Okay, it's great that they told you that this would be okay. They don't necessarily know what they're talking about. You can't take them at their word. You have to ask them. If you're on the phone, again, seller support, they probably will give you bad information on this anyway, so I wouldn't waste your time asking them about multiple accounts. If you have biz dev, they're ramping you up in another marketplace, whatever they're doing for you, get it in writing, like you just said. Make sure they don't just send you an email saying, yeah, sure, this is fine, no problem. I've seen those emails hundreds of times. I find out on my own that the accounts aren't annotated that say it's okay. So do not rest with just getting somebody on the phone to say it's okay, who may or may not know what they're talking about. I mean, some of these internal reps at Amazon are very new and they're kind of, rookie level or amateur level when it comes to seller performance, and they don't really know. And they don't ask somebody in seller performance, how does this need to be done? Just because, they would probably if you asked them to, but there aren't enough hours in the day and they forget about it. So you really press to make sure that they get this documented on both accounts, the new approved account and your original account. This is approved by seller performance.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Cool. Anything you want to add lastly before we disappear?
Nope. Just obviously Chris@ecommercechris.com is the best place to reach me. The website's ecommercechris.com. And if you're interested in our membership, the online courses that we offer, which right now annually $500 a year, I'm continually adding to that. But that's ecommercechris.com/membership.
Cool. Okay. Chris, thanks again for coming in. Guys, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this one. We're quite in depth with this. And I think, again, it's just trying to create this clarity. But if this is your first time, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Otherwise, we'll see you again soon. Take care.